Good morning, fathers of daughters. This is FMB Martin. Welcome to Grow That YouTube channel. To all my Spanish speakers, bienvenido aquí hoy. Gracias. Well, we are back for another live stream, fathers. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We are. It is Sunday. Welcome to the beautiful state of Colorado. And we are here, fathers, for another live stream. Welcome you all. All fathers are welcome, regardless of your ethnic group, background, and or culture. I welcome you all. Okay, fathers, today's live stream. What we're going to be covering is children suffer from incarcerated parents. I want to repeat that. Children suffer from incarcerated parents. You know, parents, when either parent or both parents are incarcerated, our children suffer. It's just a fact. And I want to go a little bit deeper today on this live stream so we can take a look at exactly how children suffer as children, and it carries on into their adulthood a lot of times. Working in the criminal justice system for 20 years as a former state juvenile probation officer and also in K-12 education. As a teacher, dean of students, and restorative justice coordinator, I saw my share of kids that were suffering from incarcerated parents. Now, not all children suffer the same. Some children don't suffer as much as other children when their parents are incarcerated. Doesn't mean that they're not suffering. Some kids can handle it a little bit different and a little bit better because they're kids, right? And my experience has taught me that when you have an incarcerated parent and you're working with kids on a daily basis, in the educational system specifically, that trauma that kids are experiencing, the anxiety, sometimes depression because they have an incarcerated parent, it's real. And children are resilient. We know this. Children are very, very resilient, but that doesn't mean that they don't suffer when they have an incarcerated parent. I have some really, really great videos today that I want to share with parents. And I want to go a little bit deeper, like I said. We're talking about the incarceration of parents. How kids struggle when they have an incarcerated parent. Kids, a lot of times, their behavior changes when they're in school, when they have incarcerated parents. Like I said, the trauma that they're experiencing, the anxiety, rather, that they experience while they're in school, having to explain to their classmates that they have parents or a parent that's been incarcerated. And it's just a lot of pressure. They're going to have emotional highs. They're going to have emotional lows. It's not always going to be easy for them to connect to adults, to trust adults, specifically when their household has changed, when the routine has changed because they have an incarcerated parent. It's huge. We don't know how kids are going to respond in school. It's going to be difficult for a lot of them because so many kids don't have resources when their parents are incarcerated. So parents, I want to dive in to what it looks like through the lens of a child when their parents are incarcerated, what kids are going through when they have an incarcerated parent, how they're feeling emotionally, physically. A lot of things can change. A lot of kids could stop eating. Their diets can become a problem for them. They may not be hungry. They could suppress their feelings when they don't have interventions to help them overcome their anxiety when dealing with an incarcerated parent. Their personalities change. Their self-esteem takes a hit. So it's real, parents, right? So we have to do everything in our power to make sure that we don't become victims of or become a victim in the criminal justice system. We have to do everything in our power as parents to ensure that our children are always protected and safe. We have to do everything as parents to ensure that we are doing and living right in our lives. That's our responsibility as parents, okay? We cannot pass that on to our children. We cannot accept or expect our children to take care of themselves. If one or both parents are incarcerated, it takes an entire village. And I've said this in many of my videos. I will continue to say it. It takes an entire village to raise children. It does. It really, really does. So when kids are suffering from an incarcerated parent, they may lash out. They may withdraw. They may do a lot of things that are unbecoming of them because they're kids. Okay. So I want to get these videos started. Like I said, welcome to today's live stream. I'm excited about it. And Grow Dad YouTube channel, we are here to provide solutions for fathers of daughters. We are here to be that bridge in helping fathers understand our sense of urgency that we must have in order to sustain long-term sustainable relationships with our baby girls. That's why I created Grow Dad YouTube channel. I am a father of 4 adult daughters, 36, 30, 26, and 24. Love my baby girls. They're amazing women. They're all awesome women. I am blessed and I'm forever grateful. So fathers, I'm going to show you 2 videos that are back to back. Okay. And then I think today I have probably about 6 to 8 videos. I might have a few more, but we're going to share them. Okay, fathers, I want you to dig deep. I want you to take a look at what's going on here. Parents, I want you to reflect. I want you to take a look at our responsibility, our consistency that we have to ensure that our children are always protected and safe. Okay, let's take a look at these first 2 videos.
The most challenging part of my mom being incarcerated is she's not there for big events, birthdays, graduations, stuff like that.
And hearing her cry and saying sorry that she was in there hurt the most because I couldn't hug her or tell her everything was okay. One day you're like playing catch with your dad, you know, and you wake up from a bad dream and you go to your dad, you know, and then the next day he's not there. And he's not no longer picking you up from school, no longer kissing you goodnight and tucking you in. And then his absence just becomes a part of life.
But it's hard. Nobody really knows what you go through until you're in the shoes of that person.
A lot of people had, they felt sorry for me. So a lot of people treated me differently. I got special treatment. And then I also got treated, you know, kind of bad too because of the fact that she was in prison.
My sisters and I, we used to be really close, but I started defending my dad, and my sisters started defending my mom and trying to make me understand what he did was wrong and that he made a mistake and he's going to be paying for that. And so we disconnected and we kind of just live with each other instead of our being sisters.
My sister's taking it much worse. My dad has been in prison in and out almost his whole life since he was 17. So he was never there for my sister either. So my sister is taking it harder. But I think she's like more like covering it for me because she sees what I go through already. So she's more like, I don't want to talk about it. She's taking it much worse.
I talked to my family about it, my grandma the most, but I just felt like more independent on it and doing it on my own and not talking to her. I wish that someone had told me that I wasn't alone, because feeling alone is probably the worst feeling in the world. And I wish someone would have just been there for me.
Don't lock yourself away. Just know that like you're going to be okay. There's always going to be there's someone there that's going through the same thing as you. So be open-minded about it. So don't, like I said, like don't put yourself in a box. Like you're going to be okay.
Trouble doesn't last always. The way I feel today might not be the way that you feel tomorrow about your parent or about your situation.
Don't get used to faking a smile and just allow others into your life and others to help you and support you.
Okay, parents, what are your thoughts on those first two videos? The first video was a PSA. Second video was actual children of incarcerated parents. And the one thing I could tell you, being a former state juvenile probation officer, I didn't have a lot of kids that were on probation that had incarcerated parents, but I did have some. I saw it more when I was the dean of students at the middle school and high school, where I was the dean of students in Denver, Colorado, Denver Public Schools. And the one thing I could tell you, kids are resilient. And as you can see from these young people, they're very resilient. Kids have a way of translating their pain differently than adults. And most of the children, I've worked with thousands of children over a 30-year period, thousands from all socioeconomic backgrounds and or cultures. And the one thing I could say that children are definitely resilient in their decision-making, they're resilient in their approach, and they're just resilient human beings because I think that God gives them the ability to be able to look at life objectively, even when they are in pain, even when they are going through trauma. Kids have a way of working through differently than adults. That's been my experience of working with thousands of children over a 30-year period. So parents, I want to extend my hand to each and every parent in helping us understand we have a huge responsibility to ensure that our children are always protected and safe, which means that we have to live our lives right. And we have to go far and beyond, because once we decide to have children, we bring them into this world. It is no longer about us. It is no longer about us. It is 100% about our children, which means that we have to do right by them. We have to do everything in our power to stay away from the criminal justice system and stay away from illegal acts that will potentially put our family in harm's way. You know, when I was a dean of students, a lot of the kids that I worked with that had incarcerated parents, their behaviors were up and down. You know, they had good days, they had bad days. And many of them they didn't want to be a part of school. They only came to school because of their peer groups and their socialization. That was their one escape, to be able to come around their friends and make it through a day. So kids are resilient, but parents, we cannot put our children in harm's way ever. And so many children, you know, are raising themselves. They end up becoming homeless. They end up getting involved in drugs and alcohol. They self-inflict drugs and alcohol into their bodies to remove themselves from the pain, from the suffering, from the humiliation of having an incarcerated parent. They withdraw. They don't want to be around adults. They don't trust adults. And you can't blame many of them, because so many of their lives have just been wrecked by having an incarcerated parent. So parents, we have to do everything in our power. Okay, that was the first two videos. This next video is about 16 minutes long, and it's going to be talking about kids of incarcerated parents. Okay, let me get it set up. Okay, parents, this is video number 3. It is called Incarcerated. Let me get it right. It is called Children of Incarcerated Parents.
The United States is known to have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Parents that reside in poorer urban areas may find themselves in jail for robbery, assault, or drug possession. Families in mainly white upper-class neighborhoods may see a parent going to jail for alcohol abuse or fraud. According to a special report by the Justice Department's Bureau of Statistics, between 1991 and 2007, parents held at state and federal prisons increased by 79%. Children of incarcerated parents increased by 80%. Shakil Muallamak recently graduated from high school, but he was only 10 years old when his father was incarcerated.
Well, my dad was incarcerated when I was 10, going on 11 years old. I found out it was funny how I found out. It was after school, you know. I just had seen him on the weekends, and it was a weekday. I just got off of school, and I came home to my mom, and she told me, oh, well, she didn't really tell me immediately. Like, she was just acting really weird, and she eventually told me that my dad was locked up, and I couldn't really wrap my mind around it because I had just seen him on the weekend, and I was expecting to see him on the coming up weekend. So it was really hard to take in.
Shaquille's father spent 12 years in prison, and while incarcerated in New York State Prison, he spent 5 of those 12 years in solitary confinement for non-violent disciplinary infractions. Shaquille grew up with little contact with his father, since individuals in disciplinary segregation in New York are most often denied visits and phone calls.
It was like a part of me was missing. It was like a person that I was used to always being around was just gone, just taken away from me. It felt like somebody died. It wasn't a good feeling at all.
Shaquille says the confinement of his father felt like he too was incarcerated, doing time along with him. And communication with him was difficult because of the circumstances he was under. As a growing teen, problems such as puberty, hormonal rage, and many other things teenage boys typically go through were uncomfortable to talk to his mother about. He didn't know how to bring those conversations up to her, and she didn't know how to respond or what to say the seldom times he attempted it. He felt angry.
For the most part, I feel like at first I went through a angry phase where I was really just angry at the world. I got into a lot of trouble in school. I had a lot of behavioral issues, stuff like that. Also, I would read a lot. Like, I would read tons of books just to like escape the world and reality around me. And that's, I play chess, stuff like that, things to keep my mind away from even thinking about, my dad and stuff. I just really, I educated myself basically on the system instead of just going off of my feelings and how I was feeling.
Shaquille's father is now a well-known prison reform activist. Five Mu'allamak is also director of the organization Incarcerated Nation Campaign. His activism has reached schools and universities nationwide. Today, Shaquille works side by side his father at the Incarcerated Nation Campaign. He is the director of youth services, where he aims to educate his peers and give a voice to youth at risk of incarceration.
I help to teach and educate youth on the system and how there are pitfalls and how there are traps to get us into the system and keep us trapped into the system. I mean, one, for minority youth, we already, our communities are polluted with liquor stores and drugs and all types of things to get us into trouble and to keep us in the system. So it's about, what I do is I try to open awareness to youth about, the pitfalls and traps that are set up for us.
In 2011, there were more than 120,000 incarcerated mothers and 1.1 million fathers. Currently, there are more than 2.7 million children in the U.S. that have at least one incarcerated parent, and approximately 10 million children have experienced parental incarceration at some point in their lives. Demographically, that's 1 in 9 African American children, 1 in 28 Hispanic children, and 1 in 57 white children with an incarcerated parent in the United States. One of the most controversial debates surrounding this matter is whether having an incarcerated parent means the child will eventually go to prison too someday. Some believe that there still isn't adequate research to prove whether a child is more likely to go to jail. But according to the Department of Health and Human Services, children of incarcerated parents are 7 times more likely to be locked up one day.
A lot, we face being misled by others, we want to fit in, we want some type of sense of want or need, from other people, and we might get mixed in with the wrong crowds or groups or gangs or whatever. I never personally did, but speaking for other people, that's what happens, we want to fit in, we want some attention. We want somebody to hear our voice, you know, and we do stupid stuff, but we shouldn't. And we should think with our heads.
Some of the emotional issues children often face is chronic sleeplessness, difficulties concentrating, and depression. 16% of children develop temporary school phobias that make them unwilling to attend school for up to 6 weeks following their parents' incarceration. Others may react with anger, defiance, and a desire for retaliation towards those who reject and taunt them. I asked Shaquille what his advice would be to others who deal with the issue he's dealt with.
Study. Study mostly on your history, and just how once you read on history, you recognize how it repeats itself. You know, it never really changes. Nothing ever really changes. It just repeats itself in different forms. And incarceration is just another form of slavery. If you know history, you know that.
Alan Singer is a professor of teaching literacy and leadership at Hofstra University and the program director of graduate programs in social studies education. Dr. Singer is a former New York City high school social studies teacher and is editor of Social Science Docket. The incarceration of parents in the United States is a form of dual punishment, he tells me. Adults are punished, but so are innocent children.
The arrest and incarceration of a parent is very much a dual punishment. The incarcerated parent is punished, but we are also looking at the punishment of children. And there doesn't seem to be very much focus on what is happening to children who are left behind. I think the incarceration of the parents creates a crisis. It creates a crisis for the child. It creates a crisis for families. It creates a crisis for communities, but it also creates a crisis for American society as a whole.
When a parent goes to jail, typically the remaining parent is left to care for the children, unless in certain cases the children could be put up for adoption. 88% of incarcerated fathers rely on the mother to provide daily care, and 2% rely on foster care. 37% of incarcerated mothers rely on the father to provide care. 45% rely on the grandparents' care. 23% rely on friends or relatives, and 11% rely on foster care.
Children are left behind, don't form emotional bonds with parents. They need those emotional bonds to mature into adults who care about others, but those bonds are broken. No one is looking at that. No one seems to be concerned about that. You have communities which have large concentrations, particularly inner city, poor minority communities, large concentrations of children who are living under these circumstances. And they go to schools, puts tremendous stress on schools. It puts tremendous stress on the caregivers who remain home with them. Lots of times their grandparents have to take on responsibility for these children. The children end up feeling responsible for the breakup of their families. They don't know what happened to their parent. They don't understand why. So we're looking at tremendous emotional stress on these children, economic stress on the caregivers who remain. And we're looking at crises in communities.
Singer and I also talk about the logistical hardships for families when it comes to visitation, especially in the winter cold. He recently visited Greenhaven Prison.
When people are incarcerated, the people on the outside have no support. The caregivers have no support. The mothers, the fathers have no support. And that then reverberates down on the children. What we have is a system in the United States of dual punishment, but these children have committed no crimes.
But also for those children that do visit, the process can have many complicated factors, varying from the distance to the correctional facility, the cost of transportation, the number of visitors, and setting an appointment to visit. Some facilities also have limited and confusing visitation schedules that change each month depending on the inmate's last name. Men's correctional facilities are more common, although women's facilities are not. And on average, a child travels 160 miles to visit their incarcerated mother.
A lot of these women are women who became involved in drug-related activities, often just as users. People end up dealing to support their own drug habits. These kind of activities are non-racial. these kind of activities are the activities that poor people become involved in. And I think that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the impact of poverty on people's lives. And it's very important to note that this is not a racial phenomenon. I mean, one of the problems is looking at having a parent in jail means you're going to grow up in poverty. Having a parent in jail, you're going to grow up disconnected. Those are the conditions that lead to later incarceration. One of the big problems that faces parents who have been incarcerated is even after they get out. The United States has a recidivism rate of about 50%. And the reason for that is there's no work. People get out of jail. They try to take responsibility for their families. They try to take responsibility for their children. They can't get jobs. They end up back in criminal activity, and they end up back in jail. We end up with essential communities of orphans, who are divorced from the human ties that they need to develop. And this is not a plan. I don't see a plan anywhere in the United States to care for these children. I work with teachers. These children end up in schools. You have schools with large concentrations of troubled kids. They get teased, they become truant, they become dropout. It's like a self-replicating system where we take parents away, we incarcerate them, the children grow up under these circumstances, and they become the next round of people who are incarcerated.
New data shows that only a very small subset of children, those with abusive parents, were found to be more likely to thrive academically and socially if their parents are incarcerated. In certain situations, it is safer for a child to not be reunited with their incarcerated parent once released. 1 out of 8 children who are reported victims of mistreatment have parents who were recently arrested. In 90% of the cases, it was the child's mother who was arrested. Children are also sometimes concerned about bonding with their parents again if they don't see them reliable. State governments, especially states with Republican governors, have been sharply cutting back on social service budgets since the 2008 financial crisis. The children of incarcerated parents are among the most vulnerable and least protected groups, but services for these children are amongst the easiest to cut. Even states that provide some services usually hire outside organizations.
So what you have is social service budgets are cut, and the most vulnerable in society are the most affected because they don't have the political power to make any change. So what we have are the programs that could reach out to these children disappear. Now, some states do finance support services through nonprofit organizations. But even here, there's very little monitoring. We don't know how successful they are, and they are all desperately underfunded.
There is one group that Singer says is doing a sufficient job in taking positive measures in tackling the issue. The San Francisco Children of Incarcerated Parents Partnership developed an 8-point Bill of Rights for children of incarcerated parents.
It includes the right to be heard when decisions are made about them, to be considered when decisions are made about their parents, to be cared for in a parent's absence, to speak with, see, and have physical contact with a parent, to be supported as they struggle with a parent's incarceration, not to be judged, not to be blamed, not to be labeled because of a parent's incarceration, and to have the ability to choose, if they choose, to have a lifelong relationship with that parent. No state guarantees that in the United States. I think these are, if we for real want to make sure that these young people have possibility in their lives, that has to be done.
U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder is seeking out criminal justice reform. His goals are to cut imprisonment rates and spending while protecting the public. He has asked the Justice Department to charge nonviolent drug offenders with less severe federal crimes, beyond reducing the use of mandatory minimum sentences and shortening prison time for lower-level drug felons, while reserving more serious charges and longer sentences for violent and higher-up drug offenders. He believes any reform will do more for, quote, the lives being harmed, not helped, by a criminal justice system that doesn't serve the American people as well as it should. There's certainly one group that could benefit from these reforms, and that's the millions of U.S. children today with a parent in jail.
Okay, parents, what are your thoughts on that video? I can tell you from my experience of working in the criminal justice system, when a parent becomes incarcerated, the government becomes the surrogate parent. I want to make that clear. They become the surrogate parent, right? And the government's going to do something. And chances are, if you have incarcerated parents and the government becomes a surrogate, the kids are going to pay. We are 100% responsible parents for our children's overall well-being, health. And if we are not in the home with them and the government steps in, our children are done. We cannot allow the government to take control of our households or take control of our decision-making and become parents, become a parental force in decision-making of our kids. We have to take this so serious, parents. We have to go far and beyond. Parents that end up in the criminal justice system, it is not a child's fault, ever, under any circumstance. Children are born into this world. They are not asked to be brought here, but if they're here, it is 100% on the parents to ensure their protection and safety. So the criminal justice system does what it does. I worked in it for 20 years. I know what it does. I know what it's capable of doing. So parents, what I'm asking you is to ensure that you do everything right in your life, to ensure that your children have a fair shot and they have a fair chance at being successful. Because when you're incarcerated, they suffer, point blank, period. That's what it is, parents. Okay, let's take a look at another video, parents. Let me get it set up. Okay, this next video is called Shackling Children's Future.
My work looks at how does a father who has an incarceration history impact his children's educational outcomes. My findings show systematically that parental incarceration has a negative effect on kids' educational outcomes. Parental incarceration increases the likelihood that this child will be placed in special education classes. It increases the likelihood that they will be retained in grade. It reduces the likelihood that adolescents perceive that they will graduate from college. This matters because the educational trajectories that we are put on as early as kindergarten have major implications for where we end up in life. We are creating these intergenerational transmissions of disadvantage that will continue even if we close down all prisons today. The data set that I use is called the Fragile Families data set. And it's a data set that follows mothers with children born between 1998 and 2000 in 20 large US cities. These mothers give birth to their children, and researchers or interviewers start following them 48 hours after that, and they have continued to follow them for the last 15 years. The Fragile Families researchers continue to collect this data from these mothers, their partners, the mother's new partners now, and also there's a focal child that's of interest, and now they're actually collecting the same data from the kid themselves. We see these negative effects, but that also leads to questions of why. And how. And a lot of the research that has been done in this area talks about how at the individual level, the separation of a parent from a child causes trauma for children in ways that reduces their ability to pay attention in school. When a parent contributes either formally or informally to a family and that monetary contribution is removed, it increases the likelihood of homelessness. It increases the likelihood of residential instability. And so a parent's incarceration increases this aspect of instability in children's lives. That has implications for how well they can focus and do in school. The strain that is placed on the remaining caregiver when the removal of a parent occurs through incarceration also increases the likelihood that they are less able to parent in the best way that they can, and that impacts children. One of the things that my research tries to do is show that these three social institutions are very interconnected: the criminal justice system, the education system, and families. And a lot of the policy that occurs now is focused on just one of them at a time. What I hope my work does is show that these three institutions are incredibly interconnected, and that any work that we need to do to improve this needs to understand that interplay.
Okay, parents, what are your thoughts on that video? Excellent video. Once again, when we talk about incarcerated parents, children suffer. They do. They suffer. And parents, if we don't do right by our children, they are going to pay with their lives. They are. And the chances of them being successful diminishes. It really, really diminishes. And everything is in play when there's an incarcerated parent. Kids are going to be kids. Kids can only defend themselves and protect themselves as children as best they know how. And when they don't have the guidance of their parents, they're subject to the world. And we know how ugly the world is. And we'll take advantage of children. So we have a lot on our plates, parents, and we have to make sure that we are living right by our children and doing right by our children each and every day. We can never put them in a situation where they have to make decisions as adults in their best interests. That is not fair to them. They didn't ask for it. We cannot put them in the position to where they're going to be taken advantage of by the world, because the world's not going to do right by them. It just isn't. Okay, I have 6 videos that I'm going to show back to back in a row. These videos are talking to adults who live through being kids of incarcerated parents. They all have unique perspectives, and it's very interesting. When I do my research for each of my live streams every week, I get to go very deep. I get to watch literally hundreds, if I need to, hundreds of videos. So everything that I present is fair use. It's on YouTube. And I present for fathers of daughters to help them understand our sense of urgency, for parents to help them understand the sense of urgency that we have to keep our children protected and safe. So I appreciate YouTube for everything that I'm able to research and bring to my YouTube channel to share through education, information, and instruction. I feel blessed. I really, really am. And like I said in many of my videos, this is my way of giving back to fathers of daughters. This is what I do. My book, Daddy's Girls, it's in the description, and it's available at Amazon.com if you're interested. Okay, parents, Let's take a look at these last videos and then we'll wrap up this live stream. They're all between 4 to 6 minutes each. There's about 6 of them. Okay, let me get it started.
So I started this writing class with a lady named Amy Friedman, and she was the ED of POPS, which is pain of.
Karen, let me start this video over because I want you to see each one of these videos have a description of exactly what it's explaining. Okay, so let me start this over.
So I started this writing class with a lady named Amy Friedman, and she was the ED of POPS, which is pain of prison system. And she was just talking about it in her writing class, and they were having a reading. So I go to this reading, and I'm bawling because these kids, they could like feel their pain. And it was amazing to me that they could feel their pain. Because if you saw me in high school, it was just like, I'd be like, eh. So I thought I need to get involved with POPs because I know there's pain there, but I've just shut it off. And it was just amazing how these kids were in touch with their pain. So I started to volunteer at POPs, and I thought it was a very special place. So POPs is a club, and at lunchtime, once a week, they come and they have writing prompts. They don't have to write, but to get out their feelings and to know they're not alone. I think at the Venice Club, there must have been 20 to 30 people. And I think that's the most important thing is you're not alone. There's other people out there. And everyone processes different. And I think that's what we have to understand about trauma is everyone processes it differently. There's not one way. So what I feel children of incarcerated parents or siblings, what they need is starting young. There needs to be a system where in school, and I know it's a privacy issue, but if we want to help these kids and have better grades and better social, just a better life. I mean, these kids, like, I didn't have any fun as a child. I was like working, I want these children to have a real childhood and know that they are loved, that they are worthy, that they're worthy of love, that they're worthy of success. So we need to have a system starting in elementary school where these kids can get help and mentors. And it's really about mentorship. These kids need to be seen and heard and understood. One time I was volunteering someplace, I was talking about worthiness, and I said, you are worthy. These were high school students. You are worthy, and you are not what your parents did. You are not what your parents did. It has nothing to do with you. You're your own person, and you are worthy. And this girl ran out crying hysterically. So, and that's high school. So if we start these programs earlier, hopefully they'll be on the way of healing. Like, I don't want to see children in high school what I saw, when I was volunteering. I want them to know their worthiness. I want them to do well in school. And they don't have to go to college. They can go to technical. I want them to be able to have a dream. We all deserve a dream, no matter where you come from, no matter who your parents are. You deserve to have a dream, and you are worthy of that.
So when I was a little girl, like I said, I grew up in Evanston. My mom's mom wanted us to be in like a great school system. I know that there were other kids whose parents were in jail. I'm sure there were. I didn't know any of them. No one told me those stories. I was being taught there was nothing to be ashamed of because I hadn't done anything. So I on the playground would be like, gather kids around and be like, so my dad is in jail. And you could see like other kids like on the teeter totter be like, I don't know what to do with that information. And I didn't know what to do with that information. And I wouldn't say there was support. No, there wasn't. And my mom's family is very, like my grandmother is very like, put on some lipstick, everything's okay, don't talk about it. It was my mom and dad who were like, you haven't done anything wrong. You can be honest about this if you want to. But I wanted to talk about it. I really wanted to talk. I really needed to talk about it. There was no one to talk about it with, really, except for my dad. I mean, my dad would call me every night from jail. In the jails, they would have this like Hawaiian backdrop. Like I was just talking to my sister about it today. And so you'd go visit your dad in jail and then you'd take a picture like he was on vacation in Hawaii or something. And then you're like supposed to bring this picture back to your class and be like, my dad's just in this bright orange jumpsuit in Hawaii. Like he's not in jail. And I always felt like this is ridiculous. You know, like we haven't done anything wrong. He's a great person. Like, and I had that benefit. My dad is a great person. So I just felt like I shouldn't have to keep it a secret. I think it would have been great to be able to have honest conversations with other people going through the same thing, just to normalize an experience, like to sit with other kids and just talk. And I don't mean like over dramatize too, because I think that's the other thing. There's an expectation that we were not whole as the kids of incarcerated youth, that like there was a problem or a stigma with us. Like even just like the celebration, the ease. When I got older, it was writing, like writing about that experience, sharing it. And what I found is when you share it, people go, oh yeah, me too. You know, I had that experience too. And then you have a conversation that's really on equal ground and you can see that like it's really much more common than you thought it was. I think that would have been really nice. I think also it would have been nice for people to just say it like you didn't do anything wrong. It would have been nice for the police to think about us as children, which they did not do. They really, when my father was arrested and we were with him, I mean, I can remember one time we were left in a room all day with one chair, not, you know, no food, no water, no check-ins. We felt like we'd been arrested, you know? And like when they would take my father away, if we were in the car, there was no tenderness to us. So it's almost as if we didn't exist. I think there could have been a lot more care because, you know, a kid hasn't done anything wrong. They're just alive.
I grew up in several households. I grew up jumping around from home to home when I was very young, what these households look like. And I didn't know then, but that people would fall asleep on the couch, people would nod out, people would eat a lot in the house, people would be asleep in in these homes. And later, what I understood that this equated to people using heroin, people using meth, people using alcohol. And for me, I think the very first time that I touched anything was like about the age of 6 or 7, where I tried to smoke a cigarette in the bathroom with some friends because we try to be cool. I don't think anybody really has, I'd say, a perception of what they're growing up in, right? That's not even a thought or a figment. It's not something that crosses your brain. To me, the individuals that I grew up were my community, right? It was no different. I didn't consider them any type of specific way. But later on, as I, got older, I realized that we were categorized and labeled as specific groups. For me, like all my family members, the majority of them, um, grew up around certain neighborhoods. People would consider this gang culture. I just considered it growing up. But for me, those were the folks that I grew up in, primarily brown. Once I moved to Inglewood, the majority of the population there was black. Um, it was a weird shift. I say that because I was used to traditionally just hearing, Mexican culture majority, and then shifting to like a where we were like the only the second brown family on the block that we lived in. That was very, very different. But to me, it was interesting. Like we went into a specific. This is primarily Inglewood at the time. I believe this is like 2010. Sorry, 2000, early 2000s, and there was a lot of racial stuff going on. Me growing up on the west side, there weren't, a lot of black folk in the west side, and so when we shifted to this area, it was just it was something new to me. I didn't understand it, didn't necessarily visualize things like that. But just, those were the groups that were kind of going at it at the time. And so for me, it was interesting just to see how people kind of really separated and segregated one another. And it was odd for me because those are the folks I lived with inside the same building. Um, you know, shared food with them, went to each other's houses, and it was so interesting because although like the smells in the house are different of what we were cooking, maybe of some of the fragrances that they wore, the way that just accents, different backgrounds and languages, the ways those things sounded within the household, that was very different. But what was the same was the family unit. It's usually a single mother in the home, no father there, and just kids. And the majority of them were young women with kids. So that's something that I noticed right later on. But growing up, it was just like, oh, these are like me, right? We just have a mom. It was very hard to look to any elders. One, because they didn't exist in the neighborhood, right, where we grew up at. Like the majority of elders, especially coming from a male perspective, although I'm not somebody who quickly puts her hand up and says, I'm a male. I don't like the masculine perspective. But at that age, like there are no adults mainly, rarely any male figures that can give you some positive guidance. Even the female figures that were, in the neighborhood right there where I grew up at or in my household, primarily my mother, um, it was hard to really trust them and to, take their advice because they would tell you one thing and not, not do it themselves. And so for me, that was very, very difficult, you know, to really trust others and try to take their advice and, let them lead me towards whatever route they thought was best for me. Um, so instead, you turn inward. Uh, I didn't even understand what was going on, but growing up, just, my neighbors, a few people that I went to school with, but really just my neighbors just were like, in a weird way, we kind of understood that where our parents are full of shit. They don't have it figured out. Somehow we're being pressured to have things figured out. And so what we did is that we ended up finding, some comfort with one another, right? Just being around one another, just understanding that our households were the same, that we can talk and say, damn, my mom's tripping on me again for this. Joking about certain things within the household and how we treated our younger siblings and what they cried about. So that to me was how the trust began to be built with others around me. And again, it builds off of what I kind of previously talked about. Um, yeah, we may have started off as a group of young individuals, but then, an older generation comes around and kind of takes us under the wing. And those to me were like my older homies who, you know, they provided some guidance. And at the end of the day, um, when you would ask them for a favor to, follow through with something they did. And to me, that was like something that was honorable because didn't exist in the household. They're very, very transparent about things. They were very, I would say they wouldn't cover things up. They were just honest about, hey, I don't have my things together. Hey, this is what I'm going through. And even though they're only about like 5 to 10 years older than me at the time, to me, I really appreciated that. Somebody that can say, hey, you know what? This is what I'm going through, or this is who I am. And these are the things that I don't know. And so that was very comforting. And that's how I began to build trust with them.
Around I feel like the social stigma around like children who have an incarcerated parent is that if you experience parental incarceration, you're far more likely to experience incarceration yourself. And that is a statistic that I've heard from like a very young age. And like while I, you know, appreciate researchers and, it's important to have people doing research on these things, I don't think that these are the kind of statistics that you should be relaying to children, because I feel like that is something that's unintentionally just like immediately internalized. And then it becomes like this, for some people, it does become like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it has far less to do with the fact that they have an incarcerated parent and more to do with the fact that they're told that they will go to prison. I think that the kind of pressure that like young people experience, especially in my generation, is very unique to like our times. But at the same time, it's like you have like, I mean, just to list a few, like you're going through high school, and so you have pressures regarding body image, you have academic pressure, you have social pressure, you have the pressure of like figuring out what you want to do as far as career, colleges, taking tests, um, extracurriculars, and then you have at home pressures with family and, maintaining a relationship with your parents. And then just like imagine on top of that having all the pressures that come with parental incarceration, because now you have the pressures of like writing letters, sending out pictures, and answering phone calls, visits, and like that's a lot.
Definitely when I was younger was when the biggest impact hit. Um, I can't really say I remember my father being around too much in my younger ages due to being locked up in prison. And then as far as that goes, that definitely kind of strained a lot of my experiences growing up, but also with cousins going in and out of jails. I had uncles going in and out of prisons as well. So if it wasn't one thing, it was the other, I like to say. There was a lot of people that I kind of got to miss out on a lot of experiences with because they were locked up. So I believe I was around 2 years old when my dad first was arrested and sent to prison, at least within my lifetime. Um, it wasn't until around I was about 8 years old that he was released again. That didn't last too long though. He went back to jail within the next year or so. Um, it definitely impacted how I viewed other people. I found myself jealous of more of children that were able to have both parents around. It was seeing that father-son relationship. It was definitely a fear of missing out, but also it impacted my self-worth a lot. It made me feel like I didn't deserve a relationship like that. I've come to find out that that isn't true. I have multiple, I guess you could say, father-like relationships now with people, but for a long period of time, I was kind of just on my own, doing my own thing. When it came to school, I felt I had to hide a lot of what I was going through. I found early on that if I had told people my dad was arrested or dad wasn't always around, a lot of kids would kind of judge me. Some would more understand where I was coming from due to just similar surroundings. But I found there would be some people who made fun of me because I only had one parent around or it was my grandparents raising me. I didn't have it was a lot of kind of shaming on where I grew up and where I lived and kind of just the living situation I was in. A lot of teachers felt pity for me because of that. And it was something that got on my nerves because it always felt like I was being treated differently, like I was being treated better in a way. And I'm like, I'm just a normal kid. Like, this is just normal to me. Let me be normal. In my eyes, there's no reason to treat somebody better or a certain way just because of their situation. You can feel bad for them. You can share support for them, but you don't have to sit there and kind of isolate them and treat them like an outlier because then that really makes them feel like an outlier. So when it came to middle school, there was a sense of judgment from a lot of people because my dad wasn't around. And I also had cousins kind of being on and off arrested. I had uncles being on and off arrested as well. There was a lot of people judging me on the fact that my family wasn't normal. They would often tell me like, "Oh, well, why is all this happening to you? Why aren't you like us?" In a sense, is the very basic way to put it. A lot of people oftentimes would call me poor because of it, and especially because I was in the same living situation. But there was definitely, I wouldn't call it bullying. It was more like a lot of people were putting me down because I didn't have a lot of family around. Family for me, especially with half of my family living in completely different locations to Venice, it was rough because it was always kind of small portions of my family with me at a time. And this in a way transitioned to high school, but not so much because when by the time high school came around, I had my group of friends that I was comfortable with that they knew my situation to an extent, so they were understanding of what I was coming from. But trusting people was definitely difficult because of the fact that I had been hazed, I had been put down, I had been told so many things about not having a dad around or not having cousins my age around or, you know, just being surrounded by constant negativity.
I remember when I first went to go visit my father in jail. My family, it was like our first time ever doing that entire process. And I was a kid. I don't remember much, but I remember the feeling. And I remember seeing my sister and my mom putting the paperwork, getting my ID, and all of that. We weren't able to see, well, the officer said we weren't able to see my father, but an officer was able to be like, hey, like, no, it's fine. Let's get this paperwork done, background checks done. And this was early in the morning. We had to drive like 3 hours to see him. I was tired. I didn't want to go, but my mom pushed me. She's like, no, let's go see your dad, see how he is. So we get the paperwork done. I see other families getting into another bus. There's a lot of buses involved when you're seeing a loved one incarcerated. There's a lot of security pat downs, background checks, everything. You can't wear certain stuff. You can't bring in certain things. I remember my mom had to go back and leave her bag, phones, everything. We had like cash money, but they're also kind of strict on having cash or coins or just little things like that. All we had was our IDs, money, and one car key. It was like I didn't have anything. So we're on the bus. They're loading us up in a rush. They're like, get in, come on. And the bus is packed, and babies are on the bus. And I didn't think much of it, but now that I'm older, like I understand it more. And they unload us. They tell us where to go. Some families went other directions. And we're waiting in line. It's another like 2 hours in the waiting room for the next visitation. They call our last name. Well, they call my father's last name. I'm like, okay, like it's ready. Like we just grab ourselves. There's nothing to grab, no bags. So we just walk up. We're holding hands. The officer tells us where to sit. And I have another family here and another family here. And it's just like a clear plastic window with barely any kind of dividers. And just a really old phone that you see outside. Those really old school phones with little push buttons. And we didn't bring any wipes. We didn't know about the sanitary of like the importance of it when you're in there. So a family saw that we were like, oh, we didn't bring any wipes. So a family was able to give us a wipe to wipe the table, the glass when we're about to speak, and the phones. And I see my dad in his suit, and it was like, what? Like my father's really in there. Like I can't hug him. Can't do anything. And we pick up the phone. My mom talks to him. My sister talks to him. And I'm the last one. And I just remember, like, I've never seen my father, like, not intoxicated. Like, his eyes were so clear. Like, he looked fresh, but he also looked a little unhealthy being there, like, really drained physically and mentally. But I can tell that he wanted to cry, but he just held it in. I remember him just, like, holding in his tears. And I didn't understand why. And then now I'm older and I can see his face now. Like, it was just like, he was just holding all of that in. So that's the story of my father. And then now I have friends incarcerated. One is out, one is still in. But the one that's in, he's my age, and I used to write him letters, and it would just be kind of sad. Like I sometimes don't know what to say. I didn't know what to say sometimes. And then my friends incarcerated would send pictures and Thanksgiving cards, and I'm just like, wow, like sometimes I take advantage of having my family here. You know, like certain things I could say to them that they're not able to see or tell them. No phone calls, like they're limited access on that. But I've only visited my father in jail, and it was a very, I think, also very dark thing. But it was just really nice to see him.
Okay, parents. Okay, fathers of daughters. Another live stream. Our freedom is important in order for our children to become successful. Our freedom is needed and it is necessary in order for our children to become decent human beings. Okay, parents, the emotional highs and the emotional lows of our children when their parents become incarcerated, they suffer. They do. That's what it is, parents. That's what it is. Okay, I hope I was able to bring something today to the parents and fathers of daughters of those who have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated. I will keep you in my daily prayers. I will, because our children need us. Without parents, it's very difficult for kids to succeed. It's very difficult for them to be successful. So we have an obligation, parents. All right, another live stream. Thank you, fathers, for participating. And we have another live stream coming up next week. I'm here once a week, live streaming, loving it, getting better at it. The fact that I am able to provide education, information through instruction as a father of four daughters makes my day, makes me happy. I enjoy it, and I'm giving back. So I'm doing my part. Okay, I'm out until next week. Mi amigos, la próxima semana. Pass. Adios. I'll holler at you next week, my people. Peace.